When one thinks of the Roman Empire, they immediately think of the Stoic legionnaire wearing armor of overlapping steel and marching in unbroken ranks. While this image is not necessarily incorrect, it's not the whole picture. Many do not know what came before the Roman Empire, which birthed this priorly mentioned image of the Roman legionnaire. The event that marks the separation of the Roman Empire and that which came before can be summed up as the Marian Reforms, in which I will attempt to cover kind of the cultural aspects that the people living in this time period would have faced. So the subsistence and economy of Rome at the time was mainly based off trade. It consisted of wine, oils, wheat, slaves in particular. Rome was very well known for the slave market. Their military conquests bought them in loot from sacked cities and from the tribute and ransomed prisoners. And speaking of those tributes, they would often vassalize a neighboring country that they had just conquered, in which they would be paid tributes in both monetary form and manpower. The political organization of the Romans at this time, they began as a kingdom that resembled that more of the Greek city-states, and then upon the last king, which was remembered as a corrupt tyrant, the Senate was established, or at least its power as we know it today was established. It was already existing. The Senate established a checks and balance system, and they created a constitution that represented all different members of the class structure. And the social structure of the Roman was broken up into two primary classes, the patricians and the plebs. And even though there were many classes within the patricians and plebs, those were the two generalized categories. Now, a very important part of Roman life was being a citizen of Rome. The way that you obtained citizenship would either be you would be born into it, or it would be granted to you. Say you were a city that was conquered by the Romans, you could possibly have your whole city granted citizenship, which did happen. And concerning citizenship, for those who weren't necessarily Roman citizens, but they weren't necessarily foreigners, instead they were living in Roman territories, much as akin to how Puerto Rico is in a state or Costa Rica is in a state. They had rights defined for these individuals, and it came to be known as the Latin rights. And the people that this applied to came to be known as the Burgini. The family was led by a single male figurehead. This was often known as the paterfamilias, and it was a very patriarchal society. The different classes were reflected in the way that their military was structured, and the fact that you were equipped dependent upon what you could afford, which after the Marian reforms, they would be considered more of a professional army and equipped evenly, whereas this time it reflects almost a medieval style of thinking when it comes to arming soldiers, in that they have to arm themselves. Many people know that the religion of the Romans was based off Greek beliefs, but a group of people that don't necessarily get the credit that they deserve were the Etruscans, who were just north of the early Romans when they first colonized. And the state religion did stay as this pseudo-Greek mythology until Constantine shortly, I believe in 54 AD, he then changed the state religion over to Christianity. So, one interesting little tidbit about the Romans is that they firmly believed that if you wore pants, you were known as a barbarian. But that tended to change the further north they migrated and conquered. It turns out the colder it gets, the better pants are. So in conclusion, truthfully, the entirety of Rome's existence could be broken into a multitude of eras, ranging, and each of these eras could span centuries or merely decades. Especially considering that the Roman Empire didn't actually fall until 1456 at the hand of the Ottomans. I've only covered a very, very brief and sort of esoteric period. It's often forgot about, just as the Byzantines after the fall of the Western Roman Empire and how their rule is often forgot in their attempts to rebuild the Roman Empire. But it's easy to say that without the decisions of the early kings, the decisions of the Senate of Rome, and the Gallic invasions in northern Italy that prompted these Marian reforms, that our entire modern world could be completely different. And it's very easy to argue that point. Above all else, remember that ancient Romans lived lives just as we did. They had concerns, ambitions, and goals, and fears just like we do. Times may change, but overall the people never truly do.